Hello, and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And my guest today is the author of this wonderful book, Soul Making. He is Douglas Gillette. Hello.
Hi, Anna. It's great to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. This is such a wonderful book. And I think maybe it would be good to start with the title. So, Soul Making. Douglas,
Yeah.
please explain.
Well, the title is actually the publisher's, not mine. I had a different title, which is common. Um, I w was never, I'm 76, almost 77 years old. I have never been conscious, really, that I was engaged in the process of soul making. I've always been aware that I have these alternative states of consciousness and experiences and this and that and this and that, plus life as it is. And so it's only in retrospect, really, that I can see that I, at least some portion of me, some aspects of me, have been working on making, growing my soul. That goes for the subtitle too, the realization of the mystical life. I've never thought of myself as a mystic, but per se, I used to think that everybody had these experiences, both psi experiences and also the expansive states of greatly expanded awareness and a kind of feeling of lifting into the all, let's say, or and so, but I thought, well, that's kind of a presumptuous subtitle. But thinking about it, the realization of the mystical life, okay, I guess I'm an example of one kind of realization of the mystical life, but it's also true that it is a realization for me that I have been living a mystical life.
What do you mean by a mystical life?
I guess I mean a life that is both intellectually and emotionally uh, has always felt very tied to higher registers, let's say, of consciousness and being. Um, I mean, I live my daily life. I do stuff. I write, I create, I raise kids, happily married, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but I've always felt in touch, as far back as I can remember, with what is more than our little strip of reality. I guess that makes me some kind of mystic. I don't have a practice. I mean, I don't meditate. I never have. I just live in the awareness, not every moment, of course, but live in the awareness that we are within a reality, capital R, that is much bigger than what, you know, in usual states of consciousness we experience. So I guess that makes me a mystic.
Yeah, and I think many people would have used the word spiritual to
Yeah.
describe this. So, what led you to write this book?
Age. No, I mean, I've published 8 other books in different fields. Excuse me, but and I was a teacher at Oakton College for 20 years, and I still do Zoom book discussions. And some of my students or companions in the journey uh, began a couple of years asking me, because some of my stories would come out in our sessions, began asking me, why don't you write this? And I thought, well, it's just my life. But I eventually thought, well, it's not so much thinking, but I eventually came to the realization that it was a good idea to do it, um, and might help others to connect. Yeah, so that's, and at almost 77 years, I have a lot of mileage and a lot of experiences, both every day and living, but also in psi on the one hand, experiences, and then expansive states, which are different from psi. And I guess it was, if I was going to write it, this was the time.
It might be good for those who are unfamiliar with the term psi for you to elaborate a little bit on that.
Okay. For me, that means, extra, used to call it ESP, extrasensory perception, and other things, clairvoyance and so forth. That's what I mean is I have precognized without trying many of the events of my life. I've also been visited by, I guess you can call them spirits, um, uh, unlooked for, unasked for. They just show up, and so that's why, and card projection, clairvoyance, precognition, and other things. The reason I distinguish that from expansive states or the spiritual is that what I have encountered in precognitive events and so forth, as well as visitors, let's put it that way, it seems like it's about on our level where we are. It seems like a horizontal thing. And some of it is just joyful and wonderful, and some of it has been dark, as I document too in the book. And some of it is just plain like, oh, wow, that's weird, which is very different in my experience from expansive states where I'm semi-dissolved. I'm still me, but I'm being lifted. It's a vertical thing.
Good. That's a very good distinction. So can you give some examples of experiences that you've had then, where you have encountered spirits, and the difference between the lighter experiences and the darker experiences?
Okay. Well, here's one example. Years and years ago, I went up to Milwaukee. I don't know if you know where that is, but it's north of here, north of the Chicago area, with my brother's now ex-mother-in-law to her mother's apartment or condo, whatever it was back then, to pick up some furniture that my brother and his then wife wanted. So we went, it was a long drive. We went up, we stayed the night, and Louise slept with her mother in that bedroom. I took the couch. About 3 o'clock in the morning, I think it was, I woke up and had the very strong sensation that there was a little old man standing in the middle of a room glaring at me, really angry with me. And I strained to see him, but he's what is called in the literature an incipient apparition. I felt him. I knew what he was feeling. I knew where he was located. I couldn't see him. I knew what he was mad. And after trying to see him for a while, I said, and went back to sleep. But I told in the morning at breakfast, I told my brother's ex mother-in-law what had happened. She said, "That's interesting." And I knew that she was somewhat psychic. Uh, and she said, "Do you want to know how he died?" She said he was here last night, and he came into the bedroom where she was sleeping with her mother, and she sat up in bed and said, "Dad," and he smiled and disappeared. Um, but she said, "Here's how he died." They were downstairs in the basement doing laundry, and they were climbing the stairs back up to the apartment, and she heard him stumbling on the stairs behind her. She helped him get up the stairs. They made it as far as the sofa in the living room, and he died in her arms on the sofa, where I later was sleeping. And she had been sleeping, he died several months before. She'd been sleeping every night on the sofa because that's where she felt him closest. This, well, the night that I was on the sofa was the first night that she wasn't sleeping on the sofa. So my guess is he showed up expecting to find her, and he found me instead. Uh, so that wasn't particularly dark because it was he was upset. I wasn't. He didn't seem malevolent at all. He seemed just like a living person would about the situation. Okay, another experience that is dark is I'm a retired pastor, so uh, my wife and I and our 3-year-old, 3.5-year-old daughter at that time were living in the parsonage. It was practically a mansion. The former pastor had had the congregation build that for him, and he died a number of years before. Anyway, I was the succeeding pastor. I'm asleep in the master bedroom, and out the door was open, out the door to the right a little bit, and then down the hallway and to the right, my wife and our daughter were sleeping. Their door was closed. No windows open. I forget what season it was, but there was. Anyway, I, I was having a nightmare, and I semi woke up from it and felt somebody inside of me and then rising up from my chest. Someone who came through the nightmare. I couldn't really, it was a he. I couldn't really see him, but I had this impression of a guy really charred to a crisp, as if been in a horrible fire. And he rose up from my chest, rushed out through the door. I mean, again, incipient. I didn't see him. I didn't hear the sound of the rushing, but I knew that was what was happening. I got up from bed and ran after him. He ran down the hallway and blew open the closed door of where my wife and daughter were sleeping. And it was, so powerful that my wife woke up, sat up in bed, and said, "What the hell?" So I take it that's pretty dark. Um, but I've had wonderful experiences too. The one story is very long, so I don't know if you want to hear it or not. It's about my Native American ancestress appearing in the Zoom meeting. I don't know if we have time for that or not.
Let's hear it. A good
You want to
story.
hear it? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I um, when our granddaughter was born, and her first summer, yeah, her first summer, she was like 3 or 4 months old, and um, and her parents, our daughter and her then husband, uh, were in the backyard, enjoying the backyard in the summer and so forth, and he said, I don't get it. I'm half Mexican, though he doesn't look it at all. Our daughter is half Mexican. She maybe looks like it because my wife is Mexican. So, but he said, I don't get it. She, referring to our granddaughter, for whom I dedicated the book, Kennedy. Um, he said, she looks Oriental. And I said, not Oriental, Plains Indian. I said, look on your phones and, bring up late 19th century, early 20th century pictures of Plains Indians photos. They did, and they said, oh, wow, that's it. Okay. So I have an ancestress. She's my great great grandmother. I thought she was my great 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 grandmother, but I did a lot of research and it looks like great great to me. And she, the family story was that she married a white guy, one of my ancestors on my mother's side, and moved out of western Iowa, where there was just a lot of conflict between the Native Americans and the whites coming in. And the conflict, a lot of it was about land, but some of it was about horses. And my great great grandfather was, according to the family legend, a horse trader. I think now, after having done some research, yeah, he was a trader, but he was also a horse thief. The Native Americans and the whites were stealing horses back and forth and selling them. So anyway, both families rejected them, and they moved to a place to become early founders in northwest Iowa too, but on the Mississippi River, of a town called Sioux City, Iowa, because it was a refuge for mixed race couples, mostly Sioux, Indian, and so forth. Anyway, this great great grandmother, unnamed and so forth, according to the family legend, showed up at my mother's birth, and alive, I mean, in this world. But there were no pictures of her, no name, no nothing. Okay, so years later, 2 years ago, in fact, 2.5 years ago, when I became the daytime nanny for our granddaughter, was the first Zoom class that she was present at. And I showed her to the class, of course, and oh, ooh and ah. But we were talking about in the class her ancestry, as I had been able to reconstruct it, Kennedy's. And also, we were talking about how apparitions seem to be, at least some of them, using, in ways that we don't know how, the electromagnetic spectrum. So, okay, so Kennedy went back. I gave her to my wife, who was sitting on the sofa in the same room. And all of a sudden, in the center of the screen, of the Zoom screen, with her name, or what she wanted to be called, just like she came into the meeting through the person that lets people in through the waiting room. She was in the waiting room, and she was let into the meeting, and there she was in the central box, and she was in 19th century, early 20th century Native American, Sisseton, Dakota, Sioux garb. she was aging. She had long braids. She had on some kind of a shirt. It could have been buckskin, whatever, and something on her head. Anyway, she didn't look into the camera. I just saw sort of the left side of her face. She was turned slightly toward the camera, but she was looking straight out with very black eyes. I remember the piercing look. Her eyes were kind of hooded. Could be age. Mine are getting hooded too. I saw her name and I said, I, I recognized that she was not a regular Zoom class person. So I wouldn't say, hey, hi, welcome to, So I just said her name as it was printed, Synoda. And she nodded and she smiled a little bit. I couldn't tell if it was a kind of mischievous smile, secretive smile, or the fact that I mispronounced her name, which in Dakota would have been Sinoda, not Synoda. But anyway, she was there. I take those kinds of experiences kind of for granted, so I kept teaching. And when I looked back, she was gone. A few minutes later, one of my students said, did anybody else see that Native American woman? And 6 hands went up. So it wasn't just me, she had made an appearance. And he says, did we just see an apparition? I said, I don't know. I'm going to check it out. So I did. I called the administration of Oakton College, and we talked about it. And what are the chances that an old, traditionally garbed Native American woman would show up in my Zoom class? I mean, has any person like that ever walked the campus? No. Has anybody like that ever registered for a class? No. What are the chances, whether urban or on a reservation, that an old lady like that could hack into my class? Zero. Or have somebody hack. And why at that moment? How would anybody even know that I was showing my granddaughter with the Native American? So, and the administration agreed with me. I mean, they says, yeah, that's no. I think what you're describing doesn't have a natural explanation. So anyway, I did some more research, and I discovered a story. Now I'll bring this to a close. I discovered a story in the history of the state of Iowa about a chief who was named Sidominadota. And actually, before I got to that, I looked up Native American chiefs of Northwest Iowa in the late 19th century. And there's this whole list of these guys. I hadn't clicked on anything, but his name, Sidominadota, was highlighted in red. So I went, okay. So I clicked and I found his story. His family was massacred by the whites in their disputes about horses and this and that. They killed everybody except, says the Iowa Historical Society, a 10-year-old girl and her younger brother escaped and found refuge. I haven't been able to go further with that, but I want to, and see if anybody at the Iowa Historical Society knows what the name was she went by. But I can say this: Sinoda is a contraction of her father's name, Sidominadota. That's as far as I've gotten. That was mm, awakening moment for me. I'd had these experiences, but I'd never had a full on apparition and one that interacted, which often doesn't happen. But my guess is she is looking in on at least some of her female descendants. Because that was the day Kennedy was there in front of the camera.
I think there's a number of things with that story, which is absolutely brilliant. Um, what a wonderful experience that you've had. First,
Yeah,
you had an objective mediumship experience there, because it was objective in that it wasn't in your head. You could see it to the point where others saw it too. So this was witnessed by others
yeah,
as well. So this is very much an objective thing. But then there's more to it because as I was listening to you, I was thinking about native traditions and how linked they are and were to nature and the notion of spirit and how much that is a part of the belief system, the tradition. And I was thinking, oh, I wonder whether this is why you seem to have this natural ability that's there. That was the first
mm-hmm.
thing I thought. And then as you were talking about um, the suspicion being that, she's looking in on her female relatives, well, that was the other thing, or that is the other thing about this belief system, is that ancestors play a very important part. And people don't just die. There is this relationship that continues through the generations. And I think how lovely that would be the case, that, now in spiritualist traditions, of course, we also have that link with our relatives, and the mediums are, that is what they do. They help us connect with loved ones who have passed. So this isn't exceptional in that sense. It's not
Right.
exclusively the case that only Native American culture would do this. But what is true is that where we might simply do this because we don't want to lose touch with our
Yeah.
relatives we've passed, there is something more about the connection with the ancestors and the reverence that exists for the ancestors um, amongst the Native American traditions. And I would, obviously, this is true of a lot of shamanistic traditions worldwide. So I thought that was fascinating. So coming back now to your book and to you, because you talk about very early experiences in your life where you have this um, this understanding that there's more to the world than what we see.
Yeah.
Is this something that you feel is in your blood, or is this something that was there in terms of the culture of your family that you grew up with?
Oh, uh, definitely not in the culture of my family. When I would, my mother divorced my father when I was 2 years old, so he was not a factor in 99.9% of my life. But when I would tell my mother, which I occasionally did, about some of the experiences I'd had, her reaction, of course, was predictable. It was, "Oh, Douglas, that's impossible." So that, my family was very practical, pragmatic, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's in my blood. I think it's an inherent. thing that I was born with. And one, you know, some people seek this stuff. I have never sought it. So if I am a medium, and I think I am to some degree, I've never cared to develop it. Um, uh, and but I've had it all along. That came up. I'm also an artist, a painter, and a sculptor. And when I was a kid, I was so good at that stuff that uh, art teachers and my family tried to press me into, doing special classes and so on. And I didn't want to. And while I think my stuff is creative, I hold back at, you know, uprushes from the collective consciousness, or the whatever you want to call it, because an awful lot of really creative artists, whether in music or visual arts or whatever, writers, have lived and live very troubled lives, uh, and I didn't want that for myself. So it's like, no, I want to be here and I want to do A, B, C, and D. And this other stuff is fine. The only exception I would make in my life about that, what I just said, is the expansive states. Again, I haven't sought them, but they're triggered by all kinds of different things. And that is, for me, worth experiencing. And that's what got me into the degree programs that I was in and so forth. And in comparative religions and spirituality and depth psychology and all that stuff, the stuff that goes deep and big. And so, which feels different, again, from having some jerk come up through my body in the middle of the night and rush down the hallway and scare my wife, So, yeah, I've kept up rushes at a distance, and and the lifting or expansive states uh, have what's the right word? Have not convinced me, because I didn't need convincing, but have validated, I guess, that there are worlds above us. I think there are worlds on the same level and probably worlds beneath us, but there are worlds above us. Um, that's what made me, over the years, become a Neoplatonist.
Explain Neoplatonism.
There are many varieties, but basically formulated by Plotinus, guy by the name of Plotinus, Greek, living in Egypt and moved to Rome, 3rd century roughly CE. The idea that reality is layered. I mean, that's the main takeaway for me. It is layered, and it's layered from absolute goodness, love, beauty, truth, etc., and progressive layers down, where you get further and further away from that, and into darkness of one kind or another, eventually all kinds. And that's been not some of the specifics of the Neoplatonist thought, because it becomes they're trying to be logical And I don't think that discursive thought finally gets it, But the model, the general model, that there are layers of reality and that we ourselves right now live at higher registers or higher levels simultaneously with our lives here. And some of us, I think, are living simultaneously, maybe all of us, to some degree with lower levels too. And so it makes it difficult to be a human being.
Yes, I'd say being a human being is not the easiest thing in the world.
No,
um,
being a good human being. Yeah.
I think that that is definitely a challenge. Well, you so you've outlined um, your view and where it stands in a very ancient philosophy of the world. And your book seeks to bring together different worldviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about your great great grandmother
Mm-hmm.
and the worldview that she grew up with. And I'm wondering how you are bringing the two together, because this is obviously going to be a very personal view of the
Yeah.
world then,
Yeah.
because you have two views that you're drawing on, and of course I know that you will have others as well that you're thinking about, but I'm just curious about how these two particular ones fits together.
I don't know if I can answer that exactly, but I would, first thing comes to mind is that modernity, one of the dogmas of modernity is that what you see is what you get. I mean, that's all there is. If it can't be weighed, measured, etc., it isn't. Um, uh, I say that as a criticism. At the same time, I think the sciences have done a fantastic job in exploring. They give themselves too much credit because reality is far greater than what they've discovered, but uh, has done a good enough job um, for now provisionally at looking at aspects of the reality that we're mostly conscious of most of the time. And I'm okay with that. That's great. I mean, I love physics and cosmology and evolution and et cetera, et cetera. I love all that stuff. And I'm so glad that there are people that are making these discoveries um, and advancing our knowledge of this layer of reality. Um, but I do think of the modern view as just a slice. It's basically an extension of whether it's in politics, society, sciences, whatever. It's a slice of a much greater reality, and every slice is valid. It's not invalid. Every experience of reality is experiencing reality, capital R. So, and interestingly enough, as many have pointed out, the toughest, the hard-nosed sciences, mathematics, quantum physics, et cetera, in that ballpark, cosmology in a way, uh, are they have reached, they did 100 years ago now, at least for quantum physics, they reached a point at which once Einstein was finally defeated in his, his theory of, or his fear of spooky action at a distance, once non-locality was proven in quantum physics, you're right at the verge of, and some physicists have crossed this line of spirituality. I mean, there are even quantum physicists, as you know, that question the existence of particles. So, I mean, the hard sciences are now in woo-woo land. You know, you can apply them and make nuclear weapons, but the truth is, they're stepping out into, for those who allow the experience, they're stepping out into the spiritual. So I just think we're all, each of us, in our boxes. We have to have boundaries to be individuals, and it's good, and it's also nearsighted. And one of my great spiritual heroes, Sufi mystic, medieval mystic by the name of Ibn al-Arabi, he said, look, I mean, it's all true up to a point, as far as we can see. One thing he was working on is the intractable question of, and it's addressed in physics, it's addressed in medieval theology and so forth, and even the ancient Egyptians tried to address it. How do you go from the one, absolute one, to the multiplicity, to the many? In other words, how do you cross from spirit at its height, at its greatest height, or infinity, eternity, to the finite, the temporal? Nobody's got an answer to that. I mean, we see that it happens, but nobody can see how it happens. And so I live with these different worldviews. It's okay. Everybody's got a slice, a piece of it. And, I think we would all be better off learning to live with some degree of ambiguity.
Well, indeed, given that there is so much of it about.
Yeah. Yeah. People don't want to do that. They want, definite answers, and they want yes or no. And I understand that. And there are situations that call for that. But in terms of worldviews, and that means in terms of each other, views of each other, I think we have to, the sanest course is to live with a certain amount of ambiguity.
I like that. I like that very much. And I equally love the way in which you have written and this wonderful book. This is a good time to remind everyone that we are talking about soul making. And I'll be putting a link to it in the description box. Douglas, if people want to find out more about you and your work, how do they do that?
They can go to my website, which is managed by, well, actually, the guy that got us together here today, Drew. That is Douglas Gillette Creations.com.
Wonderful. I will be putting a link to that in the description box. And thank you so much for your time today, Douglas.
Oh, thanks, Anna. This was a lot of fun. You are a great host, really.
Thank you.
You really nail the stuff and ask the really good questions. I've really had fun.
Wonderful. I'm delighted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be asking what matters to families. Until then, goodbye.